The Irish seafood industry is worth $1.15 billion to the Irish economy, and over 14,500 people are employed within the Irish seafood sector. This includes over 2,000 fishing vessels in the Irish fishing fleet. The London Fisheries Convention of 1964 sits alongside the EU Common Fisheries Policy of 1983. This is an agreement that grants rights to 6 neighbouring coastal states to fish within 6 to 12 nautical miles of each other's coasts. This sets quotas for how much fish each nation can catch. It was created so that all nations got their share and so that overfishing couldn't occur. Britain intends to pull out of these agreements as a part of their Brexit plan. This means its waters for Ireland and others would be closed off. If this happens, it would be a hard EU exit on fishing. Even more concerning is the fact that Mr Gove has previously said, in support of the British Brexit campaign in 2017, a first small step in regaining full control of the 200-mile exclusive economic zone and a £6.3 billion industry, which could be a beacon of success for Brexit. This means that the UK are not just focused on their 6 to 12 nautical mile zone, which would be up to 22 kilometres, but also the 200 nautical mile zone, which would be 370 kilometres, covering all British waters, which is shown here on the map in red. But as you can see, this is where Ireland catches some of its main species of fish. Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine, Mr Michael Creed, has acknowledged on several occasions that Brexit poses very serious challenges to the Irish fishing industry.
Ireland wants the closest possible relationship with the European Union and the United Kingdom post-Brexit. At the moment, the negotiation guidelines for a future relationship envisage a free trade agreement only. In that overall context, the guidelines explicitly state, and I quote, that reciprocal access to waters and resources should be maintained, end quote. To put it plainly, the European Union 27 position is that any attempt to restrict access to fishing grounds or any unilateral moves on quotas detrimental to the European Union 27 interests would jeopardise an agreement on a future relationship.
Minister Creed explained that we must be ready for the possibility of a no-deal Brexit.
Having regard for the slow rate of progress on many outstanding issues, and while it is an outcome that nobody wants, we have to allow for the possibility of no agreement. The government as a whole is continuing to prepare for all eventualities.
I reached out to the Irish Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. The official documentation they sent me includes a statement from the Irish Fish Processors and Exporters Association. In that statement, there is nothing good in Brexit for the Irish seafood industry. We have a lot at stake here. Irish South and West Fish Producers Organisation Limited CEO Patrick Murphy says the situation will be a disaster. There will be an end to the Irish fishing industry as we know it. We feel that the greatest challenge presented is the one that requires us to inform everybody from the man on the street to our regulators, legislators and media of the catastrophe that awaits us. The entire sector is dependent on the UK and our greatest risk is access. Specifically, Brexit would affect the Irish fishing industry in 3 ways. Prohibitions on access to fish in the UK zone, which would mean a decrease in catch by between 40 to 60%. Large loss of quota share in all the commercial fisheries, potentially up to 50% in some cases. Increase in activity by other EU vessels in Irish waters, leading to stock depletion in the waters we depend upon. This month, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar explained that he and the Irish government have been hoping and planning for a deal to be made between Britain and the EU. They have also made it clear that they are aware there may be a no-deal outcome within negotiations.
We've done a lot of preparation already. The public finances are in good order, and we're setting up a rainy day fund. I know some people are telling us we shouldn't set up a rainy day fund and that we shouldn't bother balancing the books. If we do run into trouble over the next couple of years, it will be because of Brexit, and that's why it makes sense to have a rainy day fund. It makes sense to balance the books so that if the proverbial does hit the fan, that we won't find ourselves as exposed as we were 10 years ago, that we will have a rainy day fund to draw on, and that the public finances will be in order. So we won't have to do the kind of things that were done 10 years ago, raising taxes, cutting pay, cutting spending. We'll be in a much better place to deal with any shock that may arise. And an obvious place from which that shock could arise would be a disorderly Brexit. So we're right to balance the books and set up that rainy day fund.
Okay, so there is clearly a rainy day fund, but for what precisely is unclear. Michael Barnier has been the lead negotiator for the EU. He spoke recently on a trip to the United States about his thoughts on Brexit. He explains there are options for the UK to work with the EU, should they choose to accept them.
My option is not the no deal. My option is to reach a deal for the common interest and stability of this continent. And I'm working with my team to reach a deal, respecting the rules and principles of the EU and respecting the red lines of the UK. But we have to be prepared to any options. In any case, we have to be prepared. The companies, the businesses have to be prepared in any case for the Brexit, because to be frank, and I have to tell the truth, Brexit means that it cannot be business as usual. Mm-hmm. It cannot be.
Brexit Secretary Mr. Dominic Raab didn't look like he wanted to talk about the overall GDP drop for Ireland post-Brexit when he recently appeared on UK's Hot News.
Ireland falls by nearly 4% and we fall by 4%. Looking at that kind of graph, do you accept that analysis by the IMF?
Well, look, there's been all sorts of analysis done. The Bank of England has produced some analysis which show that it wouldn't be the best outcome for either side, but it would in material way aspects be worse for the EU side.
Theresa May spoke about Brexit back in 2017 at the World Economic Forum. Here, she seemed positive about both the UK and the EU dealing well within their negotiations.
Some of our European partners feel we've turned our back on them, and I know many fear what our decision means for the future of the EU itself. But as I said in my speech earlier this week, our decision to leave the European Union was no rejection of our friends in Europe.
Prime Minister May explained how important a strong EU was to her and to the UK.
It remains overwhelmingly and compellingly in Britain's national interest that the EU as an organisation should succeed.
Unfortunately, the latest news is that the UK government now say they are ready for a no-deal departure from the EU. Prime Minister Theresa May continues to insist upon the UK taking back its waters. She has been quoted in saying, "We will be an independent coastal state." The UK Fisheries Minister George Eustace told the Daily Telegraph on October 30th, 2016 that British fishermen will catch hundreds of thousands of tonnes more fish after Brexit. This may now be an accurate statement, but at the cost of Irish livelihoods and the Irish economy. I wanted to see how Brexit is understood by those who could be most affected. Howth is a beautiful fishing village on the east coast of Dublin. It is filled with people from all around the world that usually come to relax by the water or visit one of the many wonderful bars and restaurants in the area. Usually found on the menu in these places is fresh fish caught by fishermen and fisherwomen in the local area. I asked Mr. Sean Doran, a local fisherman in Howth, how he felt about the situation. And I asked him the obvious question, is the Irish government doing enough to help?
Well, they've hardly spoken about it other than a few soundbites, so no, they're not. They keep reiterating that we're all part of the EU and that we can't negotiate ourselves in bilaterals and it has to all go through Brussels, and Brussels tell us that as well. Because our own government doesn't rate fisheries high enough on its agenda as an important economic contributor to the state. It doesn't really fight its corner. Stronger EU nations are going to come in and take that bit of the pie, which will leave us a smaller bit. All that being said is we still don't know exactly what Britain are doing, and Britain still don't know themselves what they're doing. So until that is really defined, But the indications is that it'll be bad news for the Irish industry. So it's a big concern. It'll shut off straight away, something like 30 to 40% of the potential catch of the Irish fleet. As a famous politician in Ireland, Brian Lenihan Sr. once said, if you put all the fishermen into one constituency, they wouldn't elect one TD. And all of that, it's all about politics, and the politicians don't care.
I asked Mr. Doran, in what way exactly will this affect Howth?
They'll put more pressure on stocks, and eventually boats with large loans or large mortgages will simply be uneconomical because they can't fish the Welsh side of the Irish Sea. And they will either go to business or they'll have to go fishing stocks that on the west coast of Ireland, which we have a very small quota for. So we will ultimately see Howth diminish as a fishing harbour.
Mr. Tommy Gaffney is a restaurateur in Howth. He's also a publican and has lived here all his life. He is very concerned about how this will affect jobs in the area and the tourist industry.
We want to be ensured that we have a fresh supply of fish coming to Howth, to be able to supply the fishmongers so they can supply us in the hospitality industry, in bars, restaurants, hotels, clubs and the likes of. And we need some sort of clarity on that because there's a lack of it.
I asked Mr. Gaffney, did he think this was going to have a serious effect on jobs in Howth?
Between the hospitality industry and the fishing industry and the fishmongers on the pier and the leisure industry around it, there's well in excess of 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 jobs maybe. Generally, the whole Brexit thing is a mess, and the fact that there's no proper information coming through, the lack of clarity is very concerning, and we'd like the people in power to wake up and make some proper and concise decisions.
Mr. Jimmy Guerin is a local councillor. I asked him what he had to say to Mr. Doran's and Mr. Gaffney's views.
I first of all, I don't accept their argument, and I'm not carrying flags for the government. I wouldn't be a great supporter of them on the wider issues. But I think they're wrong. I think they do care about Brexit. I think they're passionate at the top of their list, and I think they're delivering on it. I don't think the fisheries and is as big a problem as people are making out. I think it's one that everybody's aware of. I think it's one that's been addressed. I think Coveney knows his brief. I think the President Minister, Creedon, knows his brief. He was over and he's met with the various authorities. He's met with tourist people in the UK. He's met with fisheries people in the EU. So I think they're doing as much as they can, and to be honest, I think they're doing a far better job than I anticipated they would. Where we will see a fall off in British tourism or UK tourism, pure, as a result of Brexit, as sure as day follows night, we'll see an increase in tourists from other EU. So what we've got to do is embrace the positives and put them against the negatives, and we win. And whatever Brexit gives us, it will not give us a fraction of the challenge that we faced during the recession. I think communication, first of all, and I mean a great time for everybody involved in different, but communication is a two-way thing, okay? Now, for instance, I know that I'm involved in one or two of these Brexit-type committees within Fingal that report into the department that, draw up these things. And no local business people would have contacted me to express views. So I think a lot of it is based on their own interpretation of what will happen, media reportings and looking at the negatives that may happen. But I don't think it's necessarily correct that it's going to be as bad as it is. Do the government care? Absolutely they do. Because they know that and I wouldn't be a big fan of the government, but I won't deny that there's a real passion about their negotiations that I don't believe they will give in. I think if it's necessary to use the veto on any issue, they will use it. So I think what we need to be doing is be getting behind our negotiating team and to be presenting a united front. And I think what Howth and fisheries and everything else, we've got to remember is Barnier's background, former Ministry for Fisheries in France, knows the cut and thrust of it, so he understands what the concerns are and he's confident they'll be able to address them.
As the UK will now most likely agree to a no-deal Brexit, it would appear that Mr Sean Doran and Mr Tommy Gaffney are right to be concerned. However, Mr Jimmy Gearan feels the government have it under control and we should not worry. However, my view is that Brexit will have an impact on the Irish fishing industry because the UK seem to be set on reclaiming their waters. But it is also my view that the overall situation is undetermined as to how big that impact will really be. This is mainly due to the confusing and often contradictory statements made by both the UK and the Irish government.